Port Haven, Oregon existed in the perpetual gray between ocean fog and rain clouds. The small coastal town, population 3,400, functioned on gossip, fishing schedules, and the unspoken agreement that some people were worth knowing and others were better ignored. Ethan Price fell firmly into the second category. For 8 years, he'd been the crazy vet who lived in the dilapidated house at the edge of town, the one with peeling paint and a fence the town council kept threatening to cite for code violations. He did the jobs nobody else wanted, cleaning gutters clogged with decades of neglect, hauling trash from foreclosed properties, fixing boats for fishermen who paid in cash and avoided eye contact. The locals whispered about him in coffee shops and church basements, but never to him. That suited Ethan fine. They didn't know his story, not the real one. Officially, Ethan Price had been a Navy SEAL who'd been reprimanded for operational failures during a mission in Somalia. The after-action report cited poor tactical judgment and failure to follow protocols. He'd been quietly pushed out with a general discharge, not quite honorable, not quite dishonorable, the military's way of saying, "We're done with you." What the report didn't say: the mission had gone sideways because of faulty intelligence from command. Ethan's team had entered a compound based on coordinates that were 300 meters off target. They'd engaged hostiles who turned out to be local militia, not the terrorist cell they'd been briefed on. 2 civilians died in the crossfire. Command needed a scapegoat. Ethan, the team leader, had taken the fall to protect his squad from career-ending consequences. He'd lost his career, his reputation, and his identity. At 44, what remained was a man with specialized skills that didn't translate to civilian life, living in a town that saw him as broken rather than betrayed. His only constant was Titan. The 9-year-old sable German shepherd lay on the porch of Ethan's house, watching the street with amber eyes that missed nothing. Titan had been deemed too aggressive for continued military service after Ethan left, a bureaucratic designation that ignored the dog's 12 confirmed explosive detections, including one vehicle-borne IED that would have killed an entire convoy. When Ethan learned the dog was scheduled for euthanasia, he'd driven 18 hours to the military kennel and signed the adoption papers himself. They understood each other, 2 soldiers discarded by the institution they'd served. On a storm-heavy November evening, Ethan was repairing his fence line. Again, the town council had sent another notice threatening fines if he didn't bring the property up to code standards. Never mind that half the houses in Port Haven had worse violations, but those homeowners were respectable. The wind was picking up from the ocean, carrying salt spray and the promise of heavier rain. Ethan worked methodically, replacing rotted posts and retensioning wire, when Titan's behavior changed. The dog went rigid, not the casual alertness of noticing a squirrel or passing car, but the full body tension of a detection K-9 identifying a target. Ears forward, body trembling with focused intensity, gaze locked on the overgrown hedgerow that bordered the property. This was the alert pattern Ethan knew intimately from deployment. Imminent threat detected, handler respond immediately. "Titan, show me," Ethan said quietly, dropping the fence post. The dog moved toward the hedgerow with deliberate precision, his training overriding age and the limp from an old hip injury. He stopped at a specific point, sat, the passive indication for explosive detection work, and looked back at Ethan with absolute certainty. Except there was no explosive. There was a girl. She was wedged between the fence and the hedge, partially hidden by overgrown blackberry vines. 14, maybe 15 years old. Unconscious, hypothermic. Her skin had the waxy pallor of prolonged cold exposure. Lips blue, breathing shallow. She wore a dress that looked decades out of style. Floral print, long sleeves, high collar, now stained and torn. The fabric was soaked through. Ethan's tactical assessment was automatic. Fresh cigarette burns on her forearms, circular and deliberate. Dislocated left shoulder, visible by the unnatural angle. Signs of prolonged malnutrition, visible ribs, hollow cheeks, brittle hair. Her wrists showed scarring consistent with repeated restraint. Ligature marks layered over older injuries. This wasn't accidental harm. This was systematic abuse. Titan had already positioned himself beside her, not guarding, but warming, his body providing heat while his presence provided something more fundamental, protection. Ethan carried her inside, moving with care to avoid jarring her shoulder. He'd performed emergency medical treatment in a dozen countries under worse conditions, but this felt different. This was a child, not a combatant. This was deliberate cruelty, not collateral damage. He began warming protocols, dry clothes from his own limited wardrobe, blankets heated in the dryer, warm fluids when she could tolerate them. He didn't call 911. Not yet. Something about her injuries, her clothing, her presence at his fence line during a storm told him that involving authorities immediately might send her back to whoever had done this. Titan refused to leave her side. The dog lay beside the couch where Ethan had placed her, his head resting on the edge, watching her with protective intensity. When she began to stir, fighting unconsciousness with visible panic, Titan gently placed his muzzle on her lap, the same calming gesture he'd used with injured soldiers during deployment. Her eyes opened, brown, terrified, searching for threats. When she saw Ethan, she tried to scramble away despite her dislocated shoulder. The movement caused her to cry out in pain. When she saw Titan, something in her face changed. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said quietly, keeping distance, hands visible. "I'm Ethan. This is Titan. He found you. You're safe here." She stared at him, at the dog, at the small cluttered house that smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Her lips moved, forming a single word that came out as a whisper. Sanctuary. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, the recognition of someone who'd been running from something worse than storm and cold. Someone who'd found the first safe place they'd seen in years. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Abigail." Her voice was hoarse, damaged from screaming or cold or both. "Abigail Marsh. I escaped from Mercy Heights." Ethan knew the name. Everyone in the region knew Mercy Heights, a private reform school for troubled youth run by Pastor Gerald Whitmore and his wife, Catherine. The Whitmores were pillars of the community, featured in local newspapers for their charitable work, praised from pulpits for saving wayward children through discipline and faith. "How long were you there?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral. 3 years. Abigail's hand found Titan's head, gripping his fur like a lifeline. "Since I was 11, after my mom died and my dad couldn't handle me anymore." Ethan saw the burns on her arms, the scarring on her wrists, the dislocated shoulder she'd been enduring for hours without medical treatment. Saw the terror in her eyes that spoke of worse things than physical injury. "What did they do to you, Abigail?" She looked at Titan, not at Ethan, when she answered. "Correction sessions, when we were bad, labor in the fields, solitary confinement in the basement. sometimes for days. They said we deserved it, that we were broken and they were fixing us, that our parents sent us there because we were beyond saving. Her voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who'd learned that expressing pain only brought more punishment. But it wasn't fixing, she continued. It was hurting. Cigarette burns for talking back, ice baths for stealing food, even though they didn't feed us enough, the basement when we cried, and worse things. She stopped, her hand tightening in Titan's fur. Worse things to the others. I saw. I couldn't stop it. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen enemy combatants treated with more humanity. How did you get out? Supply truck. Thursday afternoon delivery. I was supposed to unload boxes. The driver left the keys in the ignition when he went inside. I just ran. Drove until the truck crashed on a logging road maybe 5 miles from here. Then I ran more. Through the forest. Through the rain. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. They're looking for you, Ethan said. Not a question. They're always looking when someone runs. Pastor Whitmore says runaways damage the school's reputation. He finds them. He always finds them. And when they come back, her voice broke. When they come back, it's worse. Titan lifted his head, ears rotating toward the window. A low growl rumbled through his chest, not the alert from earlier, but the warning that came before. Ethan moved to the window, staying in shadow. Headlights were approaching up the gravel road. 2 vehicles, moving slowly, searching. Abigail saw his posture change, saw the headlights reflected in the glass, and her entire body began shaking. They found me, she whispered. They found me already. Ethan looked at this 14-year-old girl who'd been systematically tortured under the guise of reformation. Looked at Titan, who'd positioned himself protectively between Abigail and the door. Looked at the vehicles stopping at the edge of his property. For 8 years, he'd been invisible, dismissed, forgotten. The town had written him off as the crazy vet who couldn't hack it. But being overlooked meant being underestimated, and that was about to become someone else's problem. They're not taking you, Ethan said quietly. His voice carried the same absolute certainty it had when giving orders in hostile territory. Get in the back room. Stay with Titan. Whatever happens, you stay there until I say otherwise. Understand? Abigail nodded, tears streaming down her face. Why are you helping me? Ethan met her eyes. Because someone should have helped you a long time ago. The vehicles, a sheriff's cruiser and a white passenger van with Mercy Heights Reform School, stenciled on the side, parked in Ethan's driveway like they had every right to be there. Ethan watched from the window as 6 people emerged. Sheriff Dale Morrison, Pastor Gerald Whitmore, Catherine Whitmore, and 3 large men wearing Mercy Heights staff uniforms that barely concealed tactical gear. Ethan had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment. After Abigail's first night, once she'd slept and eaten, and her shoulder had been properly relocated using field medicine techniques Ethan hadn't used since Somalia, he'd begun investigating. Late-night surveillance of Mercy Heights revealed an operation that would make a military compound envious. Guard rotations every 4 hours, perimeter patrols with radios, communication protocols, security cameras covering every approach. This wasn't a school. It was a detention facility. Titan had been crucial. Ethan had collected Abigail's clothing from the night she'd arrived, the stained dress, the torn undergarments, and let Titan work. The dog's explosive detection training extended to chemical analysis. He'd alerted to sedative compounds consistent with unlawful chemical restraint, the same drugs used to control violent prisoners. When Ethan had tried to report his findings, he'd been systematically dismissed. Sheriff Morrison told him, "Nobody believes a washed-up SEAL who couldn't hack it. Pastor Whitmore is a respected member of this community. You're a nobody." The town council had threatened to condemn his property if he continued spreading dangerous lies about respected community members. Even Abigail's father, contacted by state authorities Ethan had reached out to, said she was mentally unstable and belongs in professional care. He'd been gaslighted by years of Whitmore's falsified reports claiming Abigail was delusional, violent, suicidal. The institutional trust protecting Whitmore was impenetrable, unless Ethan could shatter it completely. So he'd prepared. Hidden cameras covered his property from 6 angles, recording to cloud storage. Audio equipment captured every conversation, and he'd made one phone call to someone who still believed in him. Commander Sarah Vance, his former commanding officer who'd been fighting for 8 years to clear his name. She'd listened to everything, reviewed the evidence, made calls that only someone with her security clearance could make. The FBI's Crimes Against Children Unit, Oregon State Police, and federal prosecutors were mobilizing, but they needed time to coordinate. Ethan had to buy that time. Pastor Whitmore knocked on Ethan's door with the polite confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He was 53, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit beneath a wool coat. His smile was practiced warmth that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan opened the door 6 inches, body blocking entry. Titan sat at his heel, not growling yet, but radiating professional menace. "Mr. Price," Whitmore said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm Pastor Gerald Whitmore from Mercy Heights. I believe you have one of our students, Abigail Marsh. She's very troubled, very sick. She needs to come home where we can help her." "She's not here," Ethan said evenly. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, hand resting on his sidearm. "Now, Ethan, we've got a court order here. Judge Harrison signed it this afternoon. Abigail is a ward of Mercy Heights, legally committed by her father. Refusing to turn her over is obstruction and kidnapping." Ethan took the paper, scanned it. The legal language was dense, but the signature was real. Judge Harrison, another name on Whitmore's network. The system had been corrupted from top to bottom. "I said she's not here," Ethan repeated. Catherine Whitmore spoke next, her voice dripping false concern. "Mr. Price, we understand you're a veteran. Thank you for your service. But Abigail has told lies about Mercy Heights before. She's disturbed. She hurts herself and blames us. We only want to help her heal through Christian love and proper discipline." Titan's growl started low, building. The dog's detection training had evolved over 9 years to include reading human deception through stress pheromones and micro-expressions. Whitmore's smile tightened. "Control your animal, Mr. Price, or we'll have it destroyed, just like we should have done when the military didn't want it." The words landed like a physical blow. Ethan felt something inside him shift, not rage, but cold, operational clarity. The switch that had made him effective in combat, the part of him that could assess threats and neutralize them with surgical precision. "You just made 2 mistakes," Ethan said quietly. His voice dropped an octave, taking on the tone that had once commanded men in life or death situations. "First, you hurt children and called it salvation. Second, you came to my home thinking I was broken. He stepped onto the porch, letting the door close behind him. Titan moved with him, perfectly synchronized. "I'm not broken," Ethan continued. "I'm angry." The 3 security staff from Mercy Heights moved forward, hands going to concealed weapons. Ethan recognized their type immediately. Former military or law enforcement, hired muscle dressed as counselors. What happened next took 90 seconds. The first guard reached for Ethan's shoulder. Mistake. Ethan trapped the arm, applied pressure to the radial nerve cluster, and put the man face down on the porch decking before he could process the pain. The second drew a taser. Titan took him down with a controlled apprehension bite to the forearm, the dog's military training evident in the precision that disarmed without killing. The third guard pulled an actual firearm, illegal for civilian security, proof of Whitmore's arrogance. Ethan closed the distance, delivered a nerve strike to the brachial plexus that paralyzed the arm, stripped the weapon, and used the man's own momentum to put him on the ground. Zip ties from Ethan's toolbox, the same ones he used for fence repair, secured all 3. Sheriff Morrison reached for his service weapon. "Price, you're under arrest for—" Titan hit him from the side, not savagely but professionally. The controlled bite to Morrison's weapon hand forced him to drop the gun. The dog maintained pressure until Ethan gave the release command in German. Aus. Pastor Whitmore stood frozen, his smooth facade cracking into genuine fear. Ethan put him on his knees with a single wrist lock, not brutal, but absolutely effective. "Here's what's going to happen," Ethan said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline. "You're going to confess everything. What you've done to Abigail, what you've done to the others, who you've paid off. Every detail. You can't make me," Whitmore started. "I'm not making you do anything. But you should know that everything that's happened here in the last 5 minutes has been recorded." Ethan gestured to the cameras hidden in the porch eaves, the fence posts, the trees. "Video and audio, uploading in real time to federal servers. The FBI's Crimes Against Children unit has been monitoring since you pulled into my driveway. They're 3 minutes out right now. If you want any chance at a deal, you start talking." It was a bluff. The FBI was actually 8 minutes out, but Whitmore didn't know that. The pastor's face went through rapid calculations. Denial, anger, bargaining, then acceptance, because Ethan's tone carried the weight of truth. "You don't understand," Whitmore started, his voice cracking. "Those kids, they're damaged. Their parents pay us $5,000 a month to fix them. We're doing God's work. By torturing them, it's not torture. It's discipline, reformation. They need to be broken down before they can be built back up. It's the only way." Every word was captured, every admission recorded. Helicopter rotors cut through the air. FBI tactical team arriving ahead of ground units. Vehicle sirens approached from both directions. Oregon State Police boxing in the property. The operation Commander Vance had coordinated was executing with military precision. Sheriff Morrison, still on the ground with Titan standing over him, finally understood. "Price, what did you do?" "I stopped being invisible," Ethan answered. The FBI raid on Mercy Heights unfolded like a military operation, coordinated, thorough, devastating. 40 agents executed search warrants simultaneously. The school buildings, Whitmore's estate, the off-site meditation cabins that turned out to be isolation cells, financial offices, and the homes of everyone on Whitmore's payroll. What they found exceeded even federal prosecutors' worst expectations. 23 children currently detained, ranging from 11 to 17 years old. Medical evidence of systematic abuse, malnutrition, untreated injuries, psychological trauma consistent with torture. The basement Abigail had described contained restraint chairs with leather straps worn smooth from use, electrical shock devices disguised as therapeutic equipment, and isolation cells measuring 4 feet by 6 feet, where children had been confined for days. But the most damning evidence was Whitmore's own records. His arrogance had convinced him he was untouchable, so he documented everything: which children had been corrected and how, which parents had paid extra for intensive reformation, which officials had been bribed to look the other way. Financial records showed $18 million flowing through shell corporations over 6 years. Medical examiner reports that had ruled 12 deaths as suicides or accidents now demanded reinvestigation. Whitmore's network collapsed rapidly. Sheriff Morrison lost his badge and faced criminal charges for obstruction and corruption. 3 judges faced ethics investigations that would end their careers. The child psychologist who'd rubber-stamped every commitment surrendered his license within 48 hours. Catherine Whitmore turned state's evidence, revealing that her husband's pathology had developed over 2 decades, starting with strict discipline that escalated into systematic torture he genuinely believed was salvation. The community that had ignored Ethan for 8 years now faced an ugly truth. The forgotten veteran had seen what they'd refused to see. Local news covered the story for weeks. National media picked it up. Congressional hearings were scheduled about oversight of private reform schools. And Port Haven, Oregon, became synonymous with willful ignorance. Commander Vance's parallel investigation into Ethan's Somalia discharge vindicated him completely. The faulty intelligence had been command negligence, coordinates provided by CIA assets who'd misidentified the target location. Ethan's team had followed orders precisely. The civilian casualties were tragic but unavoidable given the bad information. The after-action report that had destroyed Ethan's career was revealed as a cover-up, protecting senior officers who'd approved the operation. Ethan received a formal apology from the Department of Defense, restoration of his honorable discharge status, and back pay totaling 8 years of lost salary. The Secretary of the Navy personally signed the documents. The teams offered reinstatement at his former rank with a promotion pathway. Ethan declined. "I found a different mission," he told Commander Vance during their meeting at a Portland hotel. She'd smiled, unsurprised. "You were always better at protecting people than following orders." Abigail entered foster care with a trauma-informed family recommended by FBI Victim Services, a couple with experience in complex PTSD and no connections to Mercy Heights. But she visited Ethan every weekend, driving the 20 miles with her new foster mother, who understood that healing wasn't linear and safety wasn't negotiable. Those weekends became recovery work, though Ethan never called it therapy. They worked with Titan on basic obedience and tracking exercises. The dog's patient presence gave Abigail something she'd been denied for 3 years: unconditional acceptance. Titan didn't care about her past, her mistakes, her trauma. He simply existed beside her, offering warmth and protection without demanding anything in return. Other survivors from Mercy Heights began coming to Ethan's property too. The FBI connected them through victim services, explaining that the veteran who'd saved Abigail was willing to help others. They arrived tentatively, broken teenagers who'd been told they were worthless, damaged, beyond saving. Ethan taught them practical skills: how to change a tire, how to navigate using a map, how to build a fire in the rain. Simple competencies that proved they were capable. The town council issued a formal public apology and allocated funding for property renovations. Ethan's dilapidated house received structural repairs, code upgrades, and an expansion to accommodate group sessions. His property was officially recognized as a veteran-run youth mentorship program. The crazy vet became Mr. Price, who saved those kids overnight. Ethan accepted the support, but not the hero worship. He knew he wasn't special. He'd just done what everyone should have done. Believed a child who said they were being hurt. 2 years after that November storm, Abigail testified at Pastor Gerald Whitmore's sentencing hearing. She was 16 now, no longer the skeletal, terrified girl who'd collapsed at Ethan's fence. She'd gained healthy weight, her arms had healed, except for faint scars she'd decided not to hide, and her voice was clear and strong. She stood before the judge, Titan sitting beside her as a certified emotional support animal, and delivered her victim impact statement. "Pastor Whitmore told us we were broken," Abigail said, her voice steady despite the packed courtroom. "He said our parents sent us to him because we were beyond saving, that the pain he inflicted was God's love, that we deserved every punishment." She looked directly at Whitmore, who sat at the defense table with his head down. "But I wasn't broken. None of us were. We were children experiencing normal pain, grief, confusion, anger, and instead of being helped, we were tortured. You took our suffering and made it worse. You profited from our agony, and you convinced an entire community to look away." Titan's head rested on her knee, the same gesture that had started everything. The moment a damaged military dog had recognized someone who needed protection. The only person who saw the truth was someone everyone else had written off. Ethan Price wasn't broken either. He was just waiting for the right mission. Whitmore received 23 concurrent life sentences without possibility of parole. His wife received 15 years in exchange for her testimony. The judges and sheriff received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. The child psychologist was never prosecuted criminally, but lost everything professionally. After the sentencing, Ethan and Abigail walked to the courthouse steps where Titan waited with Abigail's foster mother. "You were forgotten, and I was invisible," Abigail said quietly. "But we found each other." Ethan nodded, his hand resting on Titan's head. Sometimes being overlooked means you can see clearly. Everyone else was looking at Whitmore's reputation. I was looking at you. Abigail hugged him, the same fierce grip she'd used that first night when safety had seemed impossible. Later, Ethan stood at his fence line, watching Titan patrol the perimeter. The dog moved with relaxed confidence now, his limp barely noticeable, his purpose clear. The property that had represented exile now represented sanctuary. The fence that symbolized code violations now marked the boundary of safety. The house that had been dilapidated was now maintained by volunteers, veterans and survivors working together. The yard that had been overgrown now held a garden where teenagers learned to grow food. The porch where Ethan had confronted Whitmore now had rocking chairs where kids sat with Titan, finding peace in the dog's quiet presence. Ethan had been dismissed, forgotten, written off as someone who couldn't hack it, but being underestimated had given him the freedom to see what everyone else missed, and the clarity to act when action mattered most. Titan returned from his patrol sat beside Ethan and leaned against his leg. The dog, deemed too aggressive, had proved to be the perfect protector. The seal who'd taken the fall had found redemption, not through vindication, but through purpose. Sometimes salvation finds you at your lowest point, wearing fur, asking nothing, refusing to leave until you remember who you really are. Ethan scratched behind Titan's ears, watching the sun set over Port Haven. The town that had ignored him for 8 years now looked to him for guidance. But that didn't matter as much as the teenagers who walked his property without fear, the dog who'd saved more lives in retirement than during service, and the knowledge that being forgotten by the world meant being remembered by the people who needed him most. "Good boy," Ethan whispered to Titan. "Best boy." The dog's tail thumped once against the ground. Agreement, contentment, purpose fulfilled.